Thank you for coming. So Lars has told me that you guys are interested in bioinformatics. What's it about? What changes might be coming? What's involved with a career as a bioinformaticist? And I will talk to you about that a bit. But of course, it's going to be kind of a bit oriented towards the things that I work on. And that includes, to a great extent, things like the climate and agriculture. So my name is Samuel Flores. I come from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, or SLU, and I also run a research school, so a school for PhD students, and that's based at Stockholm University. So basically, most of what I'm going to talk to you about today centers around machine learning, and so bioinformatics is very much like the rest of the society in that the sort of has been transformed in recent decades by the rise of new technology, which starts produce data in gigantic quantities, in greater quantities than we could really analyze and keep up with. And part of the outcome of that was that we found that certain machine learning methods, including deep learning, which have been around for a very long time, suddenly became a lot more effective just because there was so much more data for them to be trained on. So I'm going to talk about that and how that's been helping us in bioinformatics and how we want to keep pushing that development. So my talk is in a few different parts. So first I'll talk about research, like what sort of research are we doing in bioinformatics? How does that help us to solve important problems, for example, having to do with the structure of large molecules that are in biology, like proteins and DNA and RNA, and also how it can help us deal with problems that arise in agriculture and in the environment, and especially the climate. I'm going to talk a little bit about undergraduate and master level studies, and then PhD level studies, and about some services that the universities provide in bioinformatics. So in terms of our research, so like I say, I'm focusing on agricultural topics. So this includes animal husbandry, how we can breed animals, how we can take care of them for higher production, and also for withstanding climate change, but also how they can help remediate climate change. Also, we'll talk. That also involves crop science, so that could mean monitoring diseases, monitoring performance of crops, monitoring their nutrition, their hydrology, and all sorts of things. I'm going to talk about forestry. So forestry is going to be changing a lot. I think it's kind of lagging behind at the moment, but before long we'll be able to use, for example, satellite imagery to control a lot of what's happening out in the forest, and move away from these methods that we use now, which is still based mostly on people going out to the forest and counting trees and looking for signs of things like root rot and insect infestations. Environmental science. So this is an area where there's been a lot of progress. You can use satellite images to monitor for deforestation, for instance, and then molecular sciences, which is what I work on. This has been undergone a huge revolution in that before it was a lot of work, experimental work, to determine what does a molecule look like, what does a protein look like, what does an RNA look like. And now we have methods that can predict computationally what these molecules are going to look like. They can do it very, very fast, and they're pretty accurate. So for a lot of molecules, you don't even need to do experiments. If you trust it enough, you can just use a computational model as the basis of your to draw some conclusions from. But the main point of all this is that lots of data being produced by new technologies in all of these fields, and again, this has led to the rise of machine learning, right? Because again, it's same old techniques, but now with lots more data, they become a lot more effective. and we're learning how to leverage that. So in animal husbandry, we're seeing things like intelligent breeding. We have here in Sweden, we have an effort underway called GigaCow, which collects lots of data from farmers, and it can both about their genes and about their phenotypes. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Crop science, we got this movement for precision farming. And so this is actually a worldwide huge a revolution. You might have heard of ag tech, agricultural technology. So they're everything from roboticization of the harvesters and of different pieces of equipment to take care of field crops. You got the use of satellite technology to monitor your field and so on. Forestry, that we're going to get more and more precise to the point where let's say the resolution of satellites, for instance, is going to become better, and so we can now, instead of sending out lots of humans to evaluate forests and count trees, we can use a satellite and do it in literally in milliseconds for a forest. We can monitor every tree in the country continuously, basically, or every few days at least. Environmental science, we're getting better at tracking things like, again, deforestation, but also things like pollutants, who's dumping things in rivers and so on. And then lastly, molecular science, as I mentioned, we're able to do a lot more structure prediction. I work personally on RNA, and I do deep learning for that. So what I mean by digital farming, so this can mean a lot of different things. For example, we work a lot, in my department, we work a lot on cows, and so we have systems. There's a project called GigaCow, which collects samples, genetic samples from cows all over Sweden. The farmer can send us the samples and get it sequenced for free, and they also get access to those sequences, so they know what the genetics of their cows are. But this also feeds our research, so we can know what sort of genetics we have and what sort of what we can do to improve their performance. Because part of this is genetics, like I say, but the other part of it is that we can also automate the measurement of how the cow is performing. For example, we can know down to the milliliter how much milk each cow is producing every day. We can know their weight. We can know how much it's growing. So in the case you want the cow for food, you can know how many kilograms it puts on every day. You can know how many grams of food it's eating every day. And you can do things like we have cameras that can evaluate things like, does this cow have a foot disease? Is foot inflamed? Does it have problems walking? We can detect inflammation of the udder, and it becomes really powerful when you can put in this sort of the characteristics of the animal, which we call the phenotypes, together with the genetics, or what is it called, the genotype. For instance, one thing that's really interesting recently is heat shock resistance, because heat shock is becoming more and more of a problem here in Sweden as the climate becomes warmer. Then in terms of field crops, there are, again, lots of things we can monitor. Using satellite imagery to some extent, we can monitor how the crop is growing. We can monitor things like pests, infestations, fungi, insects, and we can monitor the genetics. We can collect genetic samples and connect it to all these phenotypes. A lot of this is geographic information systems, so we can observe a field and know things about it, like what is its hydrology, how wet is it, how dry is it, what sort of nutrients it has. And this can help us administer interventions. Like, for example, do we have a pest? Do we need to control it? Do we have a problem with water getting to a certain part of the field? Do we have a problem with nutrients getting to a certain part of the field? In terms of fruits like like let's say strawberries, for instance. There is a lot of development underway. There are robots now that can harvest strawberries. They're still quite expensive and, in my mind, too complicated and inefficient, but they keep getting better. And I think the role of bioinformatics in that is things like image analysis. For example, being able to use a camera on your harvester that would identify the calyx and the stem and say, okay, I need to cut here, and direct a cutting tool. Eventually, I think this will be done by laser, but that's been quite difficult up to now. But you can also do things like you can identify fruit that's got some sort of pest that's it's either rotting or some insect has eaten part of it, and this could be done by the harvester. Like you could have the harvester like picking the fruit and deciding even before it's picked whether it's a good quality fruit or if it's secondary quality fruit. Let's see. So all of this again is available to the farmer to make better decisions, and it's available to us as researchers to be able to make innovations in terms of the genetics of the animals and in terms of new equipment and new ways of monitoring. The same sort of technique can be used for forestry. So the forest owner can have a map of their forest, and they can have software that tells them how many trees they have. They can divide up the forest into departments. Let's say because this is what a forest inventory is. Like you divide up your forest into different pieces, and it tells you what kind of species you have in each parcel or each fragment of your forest and how old they are, and it can. Eventually, I think it's going to be able to detect things like diseases. You'll know things about your different resources, such as edible mushrooms and berries. And I think this is going to lead to higher productivity of the forest, but also more responsible management. I think it's going to be easier to do things like do some sort of forest harvesting doesn't involve clearing the entire forest. This is what I work on, machine learning for structure prediction. And so this means that so basically what we do is we get sequences. So DNA sequence or RNA sequence in my case that correspond to a molecule in one organism, and then the same molecule but from a different organism. So it could be a slightly or very different sequence, and we align it to see how it changes. And from seeing how this sequence is changing across organisms through evolution, we can determine which part of it is what it's trying to do structurally. Like if we see correlated changes, like let's say something happening in this column is related to something that's happening in this column, it means that there are different parts of the molecule that are coming together, and so we can model that and say, oh, this is what the structure of this molecule, because we can infer it from the sort of interactions that we observe at the sequence level. And again, this is driven by huge amounts of sequence information that we now have. Now I'd like to get into the part of the talk where I talk about something that I've been doing a bit more recently, and this is basically I've become more and more concerned over the years about land degradation, and this is something that you probably haven't observed it in Sweden, because it's just not a problem in Sweden. We have pretty good land management. And also the amount of rain we get is so abundant that it's actually kind of hard to degrade your land, because even if you chop down all the trees, it very quickly it starts regrowing. But that's not the case in most of the world. So most of the world is now either a desert or becoming a desert. And we're talking about something like 75% of the land area on Earth. And it's absolutely terrifying. Not only is this happening in mostly in very poor countries that can least afford it and where people are going to start starving, but it's also affecting the climate. we went to South Africa recently, and considered a lot of different aspects of these things. One thing we found, for instance, is that there's a lot of rock being dug out of the ground because people want things like diamonds and metals. But the rock is just being thrown out; it's being left. But some of these rocks, if you grind them up into powder and spread them on fields, it'll fertilize the fields, and in addition, it will capture carbon. It's a process called weathering, and we can accelerate it by grinding the rock. And everybody wins from doing this. Like these mines, they get rid of some of this rock, which to them is just waste. The farmers get fertilized fields, and the rest of us get less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We've looked at solar pastoral systems, thinking about how different trees and shrubs can help make not only a more productive food growing system, but they can also give the farmer better quality of life, more shade. They can improve the hydrology so that the trees hold the water longer in various ways, and so that when it rains, they keep part of the water and then release it slowly back into the rivers, and so the rivers keep running for days, weeks after rain. Whereas if there are no trees, then we have this problem of intermittent flooding and drought. And so we looked at some of these trees that they have, and some of these can be used possibly in other places, but we have to be careful also not to take invasive species from one continent to another. We looked especially at the role of cows, because we saw that cows are the sort of cows they use in Africa are very often not European cows, but indigenous African cows, and these are cows which don't just eat grass; they'll eat anything. They'll eat the shrubbery, they'll eat the leaves on the trees, and so African farmers tend to not just cut down everything they have on their land and grow grass, but rather they leave all the shrubbery in place, and they find that this way, this sort of system, like a multi-story forest, produces more vegetation, so they can actually grow more cows at more profit. And not only that, but it gives them secondary crops. Like these trees can be giving wood, they can be giving fruit, they can be giving nuts. And so the farmer has several ways to gain income, and this makes them more resilient. So if something happens to the cows, they still have the wood. If they lose the wood, they still have the nuts and things like that. And of course, it brings benefits to the hydrology, as I mentioned, and it brings benefits in terms of biodiversity. You get more game. You can also sell the game, like you can charge hunters to come and let's say kill a gazelle or a deer or something. They are actively trying things like game fencing, game fences, where the wild game can actually go under the fence, but the cows can't. Here's an example of what sort of things happen when you have more biodiversity. Here you have other members of this decomposition chain, some of the mesofauna. So this is a dung beetle, and what dung beetle does is it digs a hole in the ground, and then it rolls up the cow poop into a little ball, and it rolls the ball into the ground. So it's putting carbon into the ground in the most direct way possible, and at the same time it's fertilizing, so the farmer wins. These are termites, and what they do is they eat grass and leaves, and they help decompose it, so that helps the soil fertility. The result is an ecosystem that's very that has a lot of biodiversity. It's much greener. The water is flowing, and in general it works a lot better than some of these other ecosystems in similar climates on other continents. So what we're thinking is that if we use the sort of cattle raising practices that they're using in Africa, in other continents, then we may see a return of some of the more diverse ecosystems that were there before. So I realize that you've seen a lot about ecology, and you haven't heard that much about bioinformatics, but the bioinformatics is in there. Like our mission there was basically to strengthen our teaching program, because we're going to be teaching a lot more. We've been teaching a lot of people in Africa, but we're also going to go to North and South America and do this, and into Asia. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop the local bioinformatics infrastructure. And our hope is that by developing this expertise, not only are we diversifying their economy and making them increasing the skill set of the people that live there, but we will also improve their ability to manage their own agriculture and their own wildlife and their environment better. And so in terms of the teaching that we're doing here in Sweden, there's lots of teaching courses available to people that might be interested in bioinformatics. For example, I teach this course that's basically a master level bioinformatics. Then we have a genome analysis, so if you like to look at the whole genome, like a genome scale phenomena. I'm planning a course on machine learning, basically deep learning, and then we have courses, of course, in genetics and remote sensing. That means things like using satellite imaging to keep track of your forest and inventory the trees on it, or monitor for signs of disease or deforestation. And then you can do project work on basically anything you're interested in. So we have a lot of teaching techniques that have been improving the results in our bioinformatics teaching. We do a flipped classroom, meaning that like at least in the classes courses I'm involved with, we don't have traditional lectures anymore. The teacher standing up in front of you and talking to you. This doesn't really happen. It's more of recorded lecture where you would watch the lecture at home and you would read some chapter of a textbook. And then when you show up for class, it's not really a lecture, it's just a discussion. And at that point, you have already arrived knowing something, and you're more engaged, and they're better able to talk to the teacher and ask questions and discuss with your classmates. So there's that. There's spaced repetition, and so this means that instead of just having one final exam at the end of the term, where like you could do nothing all semester, and then just like a few days before the exam you start cramming like crazy, and then the day after you remember nothing. You don't have that anymore. We have lots of examinations, like sometimes 2 examinations per day, and I don't think they're stressful, because you get a very small number of points on each of these, and you get a couple of tries anyway. So you can, like, if you don't do well, you can like read a little bit and then try it again. These are automated quizzes. It's not even taking your teacher's time to grade them, and the fact that you're working every day and being tested every day, this makes you learn the information a whole lot better than just having one exam over the course of the semester. Well, you don't need to worry too much about the rest, but just know that the education has been getting better. At least the students are happier, and the grades have been getting higher. When you go to the research level, traditionally we've had a huge problem where women didn't want to be in bioinformatics, and there were a number of reasons for that. Like there's been, for many years, a kind of a cultural kind of biasing where sciences, or especially the quantitative sciences, were seen as being more for men. But luckily, we've been getting better at that, and I'm very happy to say that now at the PhD level, our incoming classes are generally more or less 50% female. In fact, something very interesting has been happening at the master's level, where now we have more women than men. And I'm not just a slight, but more like 2/3 of our incoming students are women now, and it seems a bit. I don't really know what's happening there, but maybe eventually it'll get to the point where men are the underrepresented gender. But we not worried about that quite yet. Anyway, there have been a lot of really good initiatives lately, like the Wallenberg Foundation, which is you might have heard the Waller name. one of the richest families in Sweden, has been given a lot of money to develop bioinformatics teaching. So there's now a new school called the Data Driven Life Sciences Research School. And so if you're a PhD student, you can get admitted to this school, and they pay you a salary for 4 years to be a PhD student. They hire professors, they pay for lab equipment, they pay for experiments, and they pay for courses. And so these days, Sweden, I think, is probably one of the best places in the world to do a PhD in bioinformatics. And I run one research school called MedBioinfo, the National Research School in Medical Bioinformatics. And that's not nearly as big as the DDLS school is going to be in just 2 years. But anyway, I organize courses around Sweden for PhD students. And universities are starting to, or not starting, but have been for a while, providing a lot of services. We have, as I kind of mentioned, we have some breeding databases, so farmers can go and have their animals genotyped, and they can also get help even with phenotyping. And we have a bioinformaticist whose job it is to help scientists with the bioinformatical aspects of their project. Like, let's say this is an experimentalist that doesn't know much about computers. Well, we have people that can sit with that person and discuss their project. In the future, I think we'll be getting more involved with geographic information systems that are continuously monitoring crops, the forest, and the environment. And so, in conclusion, I think the role of bioinformatics has been in trying to interpret these gigantic sets of data, and also try to develop new methods that automate that learn from this data and automate the process of its analysis. And I think that's going to be a trend that continues to dominate bioinformatics for some time. And then we talked about remote sensing, we talked about genetics, we talked about precision farming and the various ag techniques that, again, they all go back in certain ways to machine learning. And we talked about how we can even look at the animal for its behavior and its characteristics and automate the process of capturing those characteristics, which we call a phenotype. And all this is going to lead to research outputs, like scientific papers that tell the world how to do things better. So I'm going to turn it over for questions in just a second, but I also brought along some games that you can play. For instance, we have a metagenomics game. So metagenomics means that you, instead of taking DNA samples from one individual, you take a DNA sample of the environment. Like, let's say, it could be a little flask of water or a little sample of soil, and you sequence the DNA of everything that's in that sample. And you can get the entire genome of some of these organisms, probably not all of them. And the way you do it is by looking for these fragments of DNA and trying to join them together. And so here's an activity where these Lego blocks represent fragments of DNA, and your job is to identify that this fragment, let's say this one says GAA, aligns or is aligns this other fragment that also says GAA, and you should be able to assemble the entire organism. And you'll also find that it's possible to make mistakes, like it's possible to misassemble, like you can assemble something that looks like it belongs together and actually they're from different organisms. So play that game. There's also a sequencing game, and so there's a sequencing machine it looks at the DNA and looks at the next base, and it tries to identify it by finding a base that's complementary to it. So it makes a single piece of DNA into double-stranded DNA. And when it does that, there's a signal, like a light that's emitted. And so this is a little guy that finds something complementary. So for example, if this guy is an A, then this little player has to find a T, which is complementary to it. If this is a T, then you have to find an A. And if this is a G, then you have to find a C. And if it's a C, you have to find a G. So these are the 4 bases of DNA, which you might have already learned about in class. And I just kind of will reinforce this concept. And I also brought some viruses. So I work with the structure of viruses and the DNA that's inside of them, and so you can look at those. And with that, now I'd like to turn it over for questions.